Hi friends, I'm Max El-Hag. In this episode of the Corpus Animus podcast, I have training think tank coaches Adam Rogers and Kyle Ruth come on the show, and we talk about 3 non-training related books that change the way that we coach. If you're on the go and you want to listen to just the audio version, subscribe to the Corpus Animus podcast on your favorite podcast app. Learn more about the art and science of program design for CrossFit in our online educational platform, The Classroom. Get a free 7-day trial at trainingthinktank.com/classroom trial.
Today's topic is the most exciting topic imaginable. We're going to be talking about books.
Yeah.
Super exciting.
This is actually a coach book club.
Yeah, Coaches
Our
Book Club.
first
Dude,
Coaches Book Club.
You know what's really sad is that would be an exciting thing
That would actually
for
be
a lot
good.
of,
And
at least for me.
And accountability, because
Yeah.
it would help keep me dialed in.
I think that the most value I've gotten out of reading lately has been trying to come up with a way to summarize my notes and share with people. I've gotten a lot of good feedback through Instagram when I put those stories up with my notes. And now the problem is when I read, I feel obligated to take notes. God, you're taking all the fun out of my habit. Now it's not even worth it anymore. I have to go take notes and transcribe it and create a narrative.
Taking notes was beat out of me in college. I no longer could get myself to take notes reading a book. There's no way.
I do a lot more reading on my phone on the Kindle app, and I just highlight it and screenshot everything that's important.
Yeah, I do that, and then I typically text it to you. I'm like, Max, you gotta read this thing that I just read.
Consciousness altering stuff.
Obviously, books are a central thing to all of our, the way that we operate in the world. All of us read quite a bit.
Yeah.
And that may not be true for all the training think tank coaches, but us 3, we read a lot.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about non-training related books because like you said, whenever you read anything, whenever you consume anything, it's always through the lens of what's important to you, which for us is usually coaching's at the forefront of our mind. So almost any book could turn into training related. You can just see the variation across the spectrum of kinds of books that we brought to the table today.
I found that learning in general, for me, was enhanced when I started thinking about it through the lens of something that I was interested in. So
Right.
when I was going through undergrad and graduate school, I looked at everything through the lens of coaching swimming. Statistics, I was how can I apply this to improve my team? When we were doing biomechanics, I would we'd take whatever, we were talking about divers spinning in the air. I'm I don't care about this, but I do care about angular velocity of the arm in the water. It was all of those things applied directly to the sport. And now the same thing happens when I read anything, except it's not swimming, now it's applied to
Do you think
CrossFit.
everybody does that? Whenever
don't
you
know.
read, you process the information through the lens of what you do on a
I think
regular
that's how you
basis?
learn.
Yeah.
You learn based on the kinds of things that are already inherent, good solid structures inside of your mind, and then you try and map it over that to make it make sense. That's just how we take in new information.
I also think I'm really obsessive, so I'm not sure that everybody is as obsessive about the topic or the thing that they're super interested in or engaged in at that time. So I don't know if everyone has a thing that they view the entire world through.
I'm very unidimensional. My brother made fun of me yesterday. He's like, you have learned so much that now you're no longer able to have conversations with me. You've gone off the deep end of being weird. I was like, well, whatever.
Okay, sorry. Sorry?
Is that going to sway how you go forward with your life?
No, I just find more weird people to talk to. Yeah.
Good.
All right, so what are we supposed to talk about here?
All right, so a non-training related book that had an impact on how you coach.
Yeah.
Adam, start it off, man.
All right, the book that I chose is called Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt. He's a social psychologist. I came onto his work when I was still working in my past job as an engineer, this idea of this dual processing system. So the premise of the book is about how and why we get in our own way when it comes to pursuing happiness. And you'll start to get a little bit more of a feel of how I view that through the lens of coach-athlete as we go, and as we get into this sort of divided self theory. So the insight that he brings to bear is this, again, the theory of the divided self, this idea that there's 2 processing systems that are at work at all times inside of our mind, and they're at work simultaneously.
Is this the slow, fast
Exactly.
idea?
So the automatic system and the control system. So Malcolm Gladwell or Daniel Kahneman, you've seen SIS-1, SIS-2, fast and slow.
Yeah, thinking fast and thinking
Thinking
slow.
fast and slow, yeah. So his visualization or way to think about the divided self is this elephant rider. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that's a really interesting way to think about it and why it also applies to coach-athlete relationship. So
what is the elephant rider?
That's me.
Yeah. You're the elephant? So you're riding. Wait. Are you the elephant or are you the rider? Now I'm really curious.
It depends on what role he fits in at any given time.
I see.
So automatic processes. Automatic processes are basically those that occur below the level of our awareness. They're quick, they're fast, they're reliable. You can do lots of them at the same time. They tend to be a little bit lower order in terms of the cognitive load that they require. Conscious or controlled processes, those are the ones that we're aware of at any given time. They tend to be a little bit more higher order. They involve things like planning, looking ahead, language, reasoning, things like that. You can really only process one controlled thought at a time, right? Whereas automatic thoughts, you can handle a lot of them because they're so quick and easy and efficient. When we start to think about these two guys happening at the same time, we start to open up a lot more possibilities of like what's actually going on in our mind. Like, we tend to only be aware of the controlled thoughts, and we don't give enough value to the automatic thoughts. We're really, if we were to think about it, there's a lot of evidence to bring to bear that say the automatic thoughts are really the ones that are running the show.
These are gut decisions. You
can think about them as gut decisions, sort of instinct level choices or beliefs.
Like I'm hungry or I'm tired or
even below that, like we can go to
I have a bad feeling about
we can go
this,
to habits,
right?
we can go to
Star
like
Wars one.
ingrained principles and beliefs. Like it's stuff that you're not aware where it's coming from, but it has a lot of impact into actually how you make decisions, the habits that you make, and even the beliefs that you have. So when we think about controlled and automatic, there's this idea, again, like if we're trying to say like who's really running the show, we would usually say it's the controlled system, right? These are the thoughts that are forefront in my head.
I'm making decisions about what I'm going to do.
Exactly. Like we want there to be like a homunculus that's up in charge and he's running the show, he's calling the shots. He's telling the automatic system, hey, go take care of this stuff while I stay up here in my ivory tower and do other things. It doesn't bear out. It doesn't bear out in the evidence and it doesn't bear out in our behaviors and our actions. And that's why Elephant and the Rider is a really good, interesting way to visualize that. So again, picture this setup as physically and tangibly as you possibly can. There's a 10,000 pound elephant, this huge, incredibly strong force of nature. It's got its own will, it's got its own, level of instinct, and it's got its own ideas about where it wants to go and what it wants to do. Now there's a rider, 180 pound guy perched up on top. 230 maybe. I'm the skinny 180. Either way, you're a lot fucking smaller than the elephant, right? Now there's a lot of things that you can probably bring to the table as the rider, right? So you have a higher vantage point. You can see in multiple directions farther off into the distance than the elephant can. You can read maps to see like, hey, here's a shortcut that we could take, or here's a danger point.
You can have a fucking plan. Like, I want to go over there.
Yeah, so the rider has lots of things that he can bring to bear. He also has language. He can talk to other riders and bring to bear their experience into the equation and say like, hey, how can we help that improve our journey? The really interesting part of that, though, is if you picture that physical setup, that rider is powerless to control what that elephant wants to do if it's against its will, right? If the elephant wants to go this way and the rider says, hey, this might be a little bit better, guess which way the elephant's going to go? It's going to go this way.
There's some good YouTube videos that show that, illustrate elephants rampaging. You're like, oh my God.
I haven't made that deep of a dive on YouTube into elephant videos.
But that's why I think it's such a good visualization to do it that way, is to actually picture like, hey, if that elephant wants to do something, that rider's powerless.
So how does this tie into like habits, right?
Yeah. So picture a habit, right? So a habit is basically something that you do over and over and over, and it goes below our level of awareness. Like eventually you get to the point where you're not even thinking about it anymore. Picture driving here to work today.
Yeah.
Like in your controlled thoughts, you were thinking about maybe this conversation, maybe about your training later today, maybe about the rest of your schedule. In the meantime, all of those automatic thoughts, the elephant got you here. How many times did you turn left? How closely were you following the car in front of you?
Maybe
your Tesla solved those problems for you.
You have no idea. I wish that was the case.
But how often do you drive somewhere and you're like, wait, how did I get here?
Yeah.
That happens to me all the time.
That happens to me walking sometimes. I'm like, I don't remember leaving the last time.
Why am I not at home in my bed? Yeah, so you start to realize like how much the automatic system really is doing, and then how easily the controlled system is distracted, right? So the automatic system, it brings to bear so many things and it does so many things for us. And the controlled system is basically just sitting up on top of it. You start that clock. Chris?
My bad. I'm a distractible.
It was the automatic part of his brain.
Yeah.
He's been in the gym so much with a clock running that he's used to a clock running. And when that thing's not going, Max actually can't operate.
Yeah,
that's true. I can't do anything right now if that clock's not running.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is not an AMRAP anymore.
That's all right. So again, think about habits. The habit that comes to mind when driving's a really good example of thinking about these two systems operating in tandem simultaneously. And then we can start to think about what happens when they conflict, what happens when they have different opinions. So a habit that you're trying to break. during quarantine, mine might be like, the boys are home all day, we're stressed out trying to get them to do their schoolwork, our workouts, walk the dog. It comes 9 o'clock at night and I'm pouring a whiskey before I know what happens, right? And as I'm sitting there pouring it, the whiskey's falling in the glass and I'm like, oh, this is like the third time this week and it's Wednesday, like what the hell's going on? And so the writer is sitting there saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't be doing this. This is a little unhealthy to do this so often. And the elephant is still doing this physical action of me doing that.
Still taking the glass after the
Still taking the glass, like as I'm thinking in my head. So you can hear almost the conversation of the elephant and the writer, like, and you can see it bear out with like habits like that. Now, a real interesting part of that is it's not just habits, like tangible habits. It's things that we would usually consider to be a little bit more controlled and thoughtful, like our underlying belief system.
Yeah.
He gave a really uncomfortable example of how that might come to bear with beliefs, and we can talk about that. It might be weird for an audience, but you guys will deal with it.
Yeah, whatever.
So there's
Let's make
this.
it weird.
Yeah, it's weird. There's a brother and a sister, so we'll call them Jack and Jill. So Jack and Jill are twins. They grew up together. They go to school together. They're actually off in college together. They go on summer vacation, they go to the mountains, maybe Appalachian Mountains somewhere, and they get this mountain cabin, and they're just having a great time. It's a good adventure, a good experience. And then one night they decide that they want to have sex.
Oh man, they hook up?
Yeah, so they say, hey, this is just gonna make our relationship
Yeah.
stronger, let's do it. Jill's on birth control and Jack uses a condom, so they do it, they enjoy the experience. They actually agree afterwards that it brought them closer together as brother and sister, and then they agree never to talk about it again. Now, if you tell that story to somebody, or if you just hear me conveying that to you guys, it's a little uncomfortable, right? And so I could ask you, like, is that wrong? Is that right? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, sure.
Sure what?
Sure. It's wrong.
So why is it wrong? Why do you think that that's wrong?
But again, that's going to be because of conditioned beliefs that I have, not necessarily because of like some innate wrongness of what they did.
Well, let's talk about it. Why is it
wrong? Because Jack used a condom when she was on birth.
Fair enough.
I hope it was mic'd up.
Yeah. We can talk about so there's innate belief that all of us, we get this sort of revulsion around that, right?
Yeah.
Like if I were to tell you that a brother and a sister having sex, like you're like, ugh, like what? Why would you do that? And so you ask somebody, like you ask them just point blank, why is that wrong? Well, if it's brother and a sister, you'll get birth defects. Okay, well, they use 2 forms of birth control. We can just make the assumption there's not going to be any babies. Well, it could mess up their relationship. Now they're just going to see each other physically. They're not going to be brother and sister anymore. Well, we said in the story that it just strengthened their bond, like it made them better. And so you can just go down that loop over and over of refuting their arguments, refuting their rational arguments to the point where they're just like, I don't know, it's just wrong, right?
Yeah,
And
That happens to people a lot.
Yeah, that happens more than you think. And the reason why is because you're sitting up here and you're talking to the writer at a rational level, where the elephant is the one where the belief really came from. And so the elephant's sitting there saying, no, that's wrong, that's revulsive, that's disgusting, that should never be acceptable. But you're not talking to the elephant, so you're never going to be able to change its mind about anything, no matter how many arguments you refute at a rational level.
So what dictates the beliefs of the elephant? Or
The elephant's beliefs are
subconscious?
basically like this guy, another book that he wrote is on moral intuition. Like there's some things that are basically deep-seated, deep-rooted in us from nature, like natural revulsiveness. Like if we see a rotting piece of meat, like, oh, that's disgusting, I don't want to touch that. There's also things that we learn inherently from our culture, from our family, through genetics. So those moral intuitions, those moral beliefs, they are deep inside of us and they're really fucking hard to change. And
Curious, in the example of the brother and sister, is that a deep-seated, like evolutionary revulsion, or is that a cultural one?
You can probably see both ends of that, right? So you can probably see like, hey, maybe evolutionary standpoint, it made a lot of sense for brothers and sisters not to hook up. Maybe it made sense for them to hook up because if you're the last 2 of a species, you got to procreate somehow.
At some point, yeah.
But didn't it happen a lot more in like past civilizations?
It probably
Like
happens now.
to keep the bloodlines.
It probably happens now.
And there was also a lot of birth
defects
defects that would happen with that, right? They'd have blood issues. They would have a lot of shit that would go on. So you could make the argument that it comes from one place, it comes from another place, but either way, it's ingrained, like it's really deep inside, and you can refute a lot of the things, like the arguments that go behind it. But the belief system, actually changing that belief system, is something that's much, much harder to do.
Should we change this podcast to why Adam believes brothers and sisters should have sex?
Please no. Please no. Just know that I was revulsed by it as well when I read it. But I'm sitting here trying to come up with reasons like, no, something
it's like I
else.
said, you asked, and I'm like, yeah, it's wrong, but I only say that it's wrong because of probably conditioned beliefs,
Yeah.
and not necessarily because there's some inherent wrongness.
What, do you
to
want
it.
another one?
And
Another-
also societal acceptance, because you
Yeah.
know if you say, well, man, maybe
it's
it's
a
not that
condition-
wrong.
that's what I mean by conditioned
Yeah, you're going to
belief.
have
Yeah, yeah.
so many people being like, whoa, that's fucked up.
That's messed up.
Yeah.
And now I don't want to do that because
And
my
then you ask
reputation's
each
on
one
the
of them
line.
independently, why is that messed up? You boil it down to the basic, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
might be something,
Yeah.
but
yeah.
There's
not that we're really aware
I don't
of.
even want to talk. The other one's about basically like, so we all own dogs, right?
Yeah.
We love them to death. They're our best friends. If your dog dies, would you eat it?
It depends on the situation, but I've always talked.
Yeah. There's
If I'm
like
in a
if-
survival situation and my dog dies, like, yeah.
If you're in a survival situation,
Yeah.
yeah. But what if it's just like real life and
hell
like you
no.
don't feel like going to the store for meat? But like again, like you start to think about why. Like why is that? Like we ascribe a soul and a meaning and a purpose to this other critter inside of our lives, but everything's gone after that. It's just meat after that. No matter what your beliefs are, like that's just meat there on the table. Like why would you not eat it?
Because it's my best friend, man.
It's not your best friend anymore. He's gone. Like,
No, I totally recognize.
It's
There's like we attach the emotional meaning to it,
Yeah.
regardless of what is actually going on. Like it's very dead.
Yeah.
It's a dead dog,
Yeah.
but we still attach meaning to it.
yeah.
What was the primary way that this book changed your coaching?
He decided that when his clients died, he'd eat them.
So the way that this changed the way that I coach, so this guy's trying to get us to think a little bit more about how our brains work, where the beliefs come from, where the habits come from, this idea of this elephant in the rider, right? And if you're trying to change your own mind, you can't just use rational arguments with it. You have to come up with a way to set habits in place over time that will eventually get down to the elephant to change its course. Now, let's back out. Let's talk about this as like coach athlete. Who's the elephant and who's the rider? The coach is the rider. The coach is the rider that's sitting up on top who has a lot of values and gifts that he can bring to the table. You know, he brings experience. He brings all the research and literature that he reads. He can talk to other coaches and come up with new methods to address weaknesses, new protocols to address squat strength deficits, things like that. All of those gifts that he brings to bear in the relationship, they're worthless if he can't get the elephant to change its mind. And so start to think about the conversations that you have with athletes. Are you talking to them at a level that they're going to take that sort of rational knowledge and turn it into emotional belief? Chances are you're not. You're trying to win them over at the level of saying like, hey, if you approach this open workout with, you know, like you did, 20 seconds of work and like 40 seconds of rest, you know, anybody would look at that and be like, no, like that's way too much rest, so we have to do that. But because Kyle was able to approach that rationally, he could then start to think about it a little bit more and get past that sort of emotional obstacle that allowed him to improve his task, right? So now when we start to talk to athletes a little bit more and try and get them into buy into what our plan might be and why our plan might be better, it can't just be like a data-driven equation. It can't just be research-oriented. We have to come to it in a way that is basically, hey, I'm going to talk to your rider, but really I have to talk to your rider often enough and simply enough and delicately enough that I'm not just getting into a battle of wills with the elephant underneath.
So something I've always found as a coach is that it's helpful to try and convince athletes that whatever idea you have to steer their direction was actually their idea, or come up with ways to sell it as their idea. Does that speak to something deeper than like the rider? Does that speak to the elephant in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I think if they can put their own name on it, if they can basically say like, this is mine, they're probably gonna have a little bit more emotional investment in it, right? And so what we're thinking about when we think about breaking habits, like you need to have long-term exposure to a new habit, and it needs to happen over and over and over and over. So any new behavior that we give, it's not just about rationally creating a reason about why you need to be doing this. It's about creating enough experience to say, oh, I see why this is better. I see why this feels better. I experienced it, and now I believe emotionally that this is going to be in my best interest moving forward.
It also, I think, kind of gives you an idea of why people gravitate towards methods that give them some sort of like instant gratification.
Exactly.
Or like they do something twice and they're like, man, I feel so much stronger.
Well, I mean,
Man, I feel so much stronger. Man, like my legs are already growing. Like it gives almost instant gratification.
Yeah, the thing, like if you actually look at the brain structures associated with automatic systems and controlled systems, the automatic system has its finger on the dopamine trigger. Like it's the one that's directly tied to feelings of reward. So if you're up here just talking rationally and logically to the rider, this guy's still gonna do what feels good. Right, he's still going to do what he's done all along. He's got a lot of momentum, and it feels good to do it. Like I just always get this trigger of dopamine every single time I do that.
Yeah, belief systems inherently don't seem rational. Like even little things, if we say the rider and the elephant, you kind of had the metaphor that the coach is the rider and the athlete is the elephant. But I think about in myself, in some capacity, my mind, is the thing that's riding the body to get it to do the things that I want to do. And belief systems that I've been trying to decondition are like, oh, I have a big body, so I shouldn't be good at gymnastics.
Right.
It's like, well, where does that come from? Does that come because there hasn't been
part
somebody?
Part of that's your own personal experience in the past too, because you've struggled with gymnastics workouts.
For sure, yeah.
It's like a self-referential thing.
But there's
where
little people that have struggled with it too.
Plenty,
So it's just
yeah.
like, is this just like, oh, I made an excuse at one point because it was hard for me, that it's hard for all big people, and then I've never seen any other big people that have had the skill level that I want to have, so then it becomes impossible. Or running, it's like running always hurts this. Trying to unwind those belief systems has not been a process of rationality. Like I did go through the rational process of like, here are methods, here's research, but it really was an effort in trying to get to the emotional state that's required for me to combat the belief. It's like I go to war with it. I don't know if that's the right thing, but that's just how I conceptualize the metaphor.
I think that's it exactly. I think that when we start to talk about those automatic thoughts, those thoughts that come from those beliefs, I suck at running, I suck at gymnastics, I suck at double unders, like you fall into these negative feedback loops. There's a thought that happens that then feeds an emotion, and then it feeds back into the thought.
Well, there's something that happens, like Max performs in a double under workout, trips a lot, makes him frustrated. That strong emotion affects the automatic system.
Right.
And therefore, then that negative feedback loop gets created.
The other thing about the elephant in general is he has a negativity bias. He's going to assign more value to negative experiences than equivalent positive ones. Equivalent being the sense like us objectively viewing it and saying hey, this is equal to A and B. He sees this and he's going to say, wait, I got to really avoid this. This is a danger for us. And that makes sense because evolutionary speaking, the automatic system was meant to keep us alive. Yeah. Hey, avoid dangers, find food, go have sex. That's like, those are the important things that it cared about. So it was much more important for the automatic system to stay away from negative stuff. But now you start to realize, hey, if he's the one making the decisions and he really is overly sensitive to negative experiences, now all of a sudden you start to understand like why that feedback loop happens. He sees any little part of a negative experience, he's going to focus on that hypersensitive and just like that's all he cares about. And we need to avoid that at any cost.
Is that where the title happiness hypothesis comes from? Is trying to figure out how to in some ways decondition away from that negativity bias?
So there's one of the things, he comes up like, obviously he's geared more towards happiness, I'm geared more towards improving the coach-athlete relationship, which I still view in the same way, this idea of trying to bridge the gap between rational knowledge and emotional belief. One of the really interesting things that he talks about in terms of a rider trying to influence an elephant is cognitive behavioral therapy. So we can go back to Max's example. I suck at double unders. Maybe he had a bad experience with it. Maybe he, over and over, like he's worse than other people in the gym. That's a thought that feeds into an emotion that feeds back. It's an automatic thought. It might have some grounding in reality.
There might be some reality to it.
It might not. You know, I'm never going to get better at this. I'm just always going to be that way. And so cognitive behavioral therapy is basically about taking that thought, like hearing yourself voice that inside of your head, going and writing it down, labeling it, like, is this an overgeneralization? Is this a magnification? Am I talking in all or nothing speak? Things like that. If you can write it down.
You've read the Captain Snout and the automatic negative
thoughts,
thoughts,
That's where I'm
right?
going. Yeah, so now you've got super questions that you can use for those automatic negative thoughts, right?
Is that true, Max? Are you really terrible at double unders? Is it true that you're never going to get better at
gymnastics before. You guys are just piling on to my weakness. I know that your double unders are shit. So. Well, now that we're talking about it, burpees. Like.
I suck at CrossFit.
We're going to change the name of this podcast to Why Max Sucks. So first,
oh man.
So it's an important exercise to write down that thought, to actually try and get it out of your head and picture it. And then now we can deal with it. Now it's outside of us. It's not a voice that's inside of our head. And now with it's outside of us, if we can categorize it, we can analyze it, we can say things like exactly that, those super questions. Is that thought true? Are you 100% sure that it's true? If it's not true, what might be a more accurate depiction of reality? Maybe I'm not good. Maybe I'm not where I want to be right now. Maybe I'm comparing myself to the wrong people.
Yeah. Or maybe I haven't spent enough time developing this skill. Or maybe in the past I've avoided this skill and therefore it's not developed where I want it to be.
But that process, that cognitive behavioral therapy process, is exactly the elephant talking to the rider. Like you put the elephant's voice out there and then you as the rider interact with that. And that's how you try and get the influence down to an emotional level. And you have to do that over and over and over and over every single time that automatic thought comes up. So if you're a depressed person who has these thoughts of, I have no future, the world is bleak, we're all going to die from coronavirus. You write those thoughts down, and then you categorize them, you label them, you analyze them, and then you try and replace them. And you have to do that every single time that they come up.
It requires so much conditioning.
Yeah, it's basically like you have to journal every single time that you have those thoughts. But that's the only way that you change a habit, is just through this repetitive nature.
I don't think it's necessary to journal to do it, but it does require, if you're not going to journal, it requires a lot of commitment to that process. I know I've gone through that. I remember as a high school swimmer, I was first introduced to the idea of thought stopping. And I just committed myself to the process of negative thought stopping. So you've always been like, Kyle, you're such a positive person. It's because I spent a year and a half literally eradicating all negative thoughts. So, but that process, that's just a tool of CBT, right? It's thought stopping and replacement. And just if you do that, if you commit to a process like that, it does make a pretty radical change in who you are and your behavior.
Yeah, it's not like an unrealistic quick fix that all of a sudden you'll be like, oh, I'm the best in the world at double unders, but it can definitely change the emotional perspective, the joy in the process of doing the actual work, the being able to find positive experiences as you go. And I think then it becomes a prophecy where it actually does change your ability level also.
People talk about mental training and what's important for mental training. That's it.
I mean, that's
what
part of it.
Boils down to is changing the way that you think about tasks.
Yeah. So that's like, I took that, and one, it helps me to better think about how I communicate to athletes. I don't try and talk to them just rationally. Like, maybe I have to present my argument in that way, but the most important part is trying to make sure that the message is simple, it's consistent, and it's something that they can always rely on me to basically tell the truth, like be super transparent about it. Because I think that that's the only way to get down to their true belief system and where they're actually making their decisions, where their behaviors are coming from. The second part is helping them work through some of those automatic negative thoughts, like force them to voice it, force them to say it out loud, and then force them to analyze it, maybe with you sitting there on the phone with them. Like, why do you think that? Where is that coming from? Is that a true depiction of reality?
Asking them the superpower questions.
Asking them the superpower questions
from Captain
Snout. Yeah. So that's how that impacted how I coach. And
that should have been my book today.
Yeah.
Captain Snout and superpower questions.
I thought you were going to say that book. I'm like, you didn't read it.
I never read that book, but I have read Captain Snout and the superpower questions multiple times.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, then I'll jump to my book, just because it kind of seems.
I think they both segue. So
yes,
you can go. You may go first.
Okay, thank you, thank you, good sir. Growing up, my parents went bankrupt when I was 5, and it created a crazy turmoil in my house. Like, we had to sell off all the cars, share one car. My mom moved to Boston and was working in Boston during the week. Coming home, my dad was commuting daily to Philly, and it was just like a really chaotic, high stress, uncomfortable part of my childhood. And I think it was like burned into my subconscious beliefs that a lack of money tied into whatever that emotional experience was, right? And it ties into so many deeper things too, because like my father's Egyptian, so there's like Middle Eastern cultural things about providing, and his whole process of pride was built on getting out of poverty and building this new life for all of us and growing us over here. So I think the process of that bankruptcy also shattered a lot of what was holding up and reinforcing him as a human. So that process really guided a lot of what happened to me and what I tried to pursue when I went off to college. Like, I've always been super fascinated with sports, athletics. I wanted to be a coach. I remember telling my teachers, like, I don't need to be doing science and math stuff. Like, even if I'm good at it, it's not like, I don't need that for being a coach. Like, I want to coach football. At the time when I was young, it was coaching football. Became coaching CrossFit, I guess, later on. And then I remember when I was going to college, everyone was like, don't waste your mind on that. Like, don't go to school to be a coach. Like, go to school to make money, to have a business. So I went to school for finance and accounting, in spite of probably the elephant inside of me's belief system being, hey, this is what you're made to do. This is like everything you think about, your body, like it's all physical, performance driven, it's your passion. And I went through like all these internships with Goldman Sachs and UBS and going down this route, and I just really just didn't like the lifestyle. And I was like, man, I'm about to commit my life to doing something I really don't like, really don't want to do. And it was I was gaining weight because you're just sitting in front of a computer, and I just naturally get bigger. So like gaining sloppy weight, not training as much, like the whole process was just shitty. And I found this book called Busting Loose from the Money Game. I don't even know how I found it. Like, I think I was just walking through and was like, oh, that's interesting. And basically it was, if you go through the book, it's kind of esoteric because you read it and it deconditions all of your normal belief systems about normal financial education, right? Like, this is what you have to do to invest in marketing, and this is how you budget, and this is how you save. And it was essentially saying, like, you can actually condition or recondition the belief systems that you have about money and actually get to this point where they call it busting loose. Like, you bust through a point where where the game of money is no longer about the normal economies of making money and saving money to be able to build wealth, and that the money will just be a consequence of how you're living your life. And I remember reading the book and being like, I'm going to dedicate to being a coach. I don't give a fuck. I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole of trying to do something because it makes me more likely to make money. I'm going to do something because I love it and try to condition my belief system that if I do something I love well, I will make money. I don't know how successful that has been over the course of the last decade, but it profoundly
But you know what
changed,
you have
I
done?
think.
You've built a really cool community and business here.
Yeah, and honestly, a lot of the belief systems in here, like one of them is like, don't worry about money. Like if it's meant to be in your life in the level that you need it, it'll be there. And I do remember even just looking back on my childhood bankruptcy, and it's like, yeah, everyone was all stressed about money, but like we ate, we all survived, everything was fine. They came out of it, and all of that worry and stress and bullshit was really just making life unhappy. And I know a lot of people that do the same thing with regards to coaching, right? Like, they love the process of coaching, but they're like,
Never going to make money coaching.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it really undermines their process of trying to be the best that they could be. They'll spend some time being a coach, and then they'll go and they'll like dabble in like, how do you make money as a micro gym? And then at some point, really what they're doing is they're diverting their passion away from what they love to then becoming a business owner. And I think for me, this was just, I thought it'd be an interesting book to bring something that was so divergent away from training that somehow I still tied back into like training my own
No,
belief
that's
systems.
interesting though. I feel like I got trapped in that to some degree, where it was like, okay, I was coaching swimming, and I had this opportunity to take over a gym, and I'm like, man, I've always dreamed of owning a gym, but really my dream was coaching. My dream was coaching, and it just happened to be I wanted to coach in a facility that was my own.
Yeah.
So I didn't, because I was still at the time at like the bottom of the coaching totem pole.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have people telling me how to coach, and so I wanted a platform to be able to do that. And then I got deep into, a couple of years into owning the gym, and I'm like, this isn't really what I want to do. What I want to do is coach people. Like, I want to dedicate to coaching people. And it's interesting where the more I've invested into the people that I coach, into what I really love to do, which, like you, is coaching, and I think, like you, is probably at its core coaching humans. The more I've delved into that, the more I found that like opportunities just pop up.
Yeah, it just has a way of working itself out. It's like the cliche, like, if you find your passion or if your work is your passion, you'll never have to work a day in your life, or something along those lines. More articulated.
So I think
with more poetry.
So I think Steven Pressfield would have a little something to say about that. So my book was The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. It was recommended to me by Adam. He let me borrow it, and I'm really happy that he did. But his core, so first off, his big thing is like dig into the work. So first off, you have to figure out what your passion is. You have to figure out what it is in his eyes you're meant to do, whether or not you believe that you're like meant to do something, or you're just pursuing something, or you provide your own meaning or create your own meaning. There's a lot of debate that can be had about that. But I love the premise of this, and that is, once you've found it, then you have to work at becoming a professional at it. And to him, a professional means acting like a professional every single day, delving into the task, identifying with the work and not with the process.
Results of the work, yeah.
Exactly. So to him, it's like an artist doesn't identify themselves as an artist. They don't identify themselves with the tool. They just go to work at being an artist every single day. They do art, but they don't identify themselves as an artist. And the big concept, the core concept that he brings up here is resistance. And essentially we all have resistance to the thing that we are meant to do in his eyes is the thing that we have the most resistance against us doing. And for me, it was coaching, right? I had all these distractions that wanted to pull me in other directions. The more I just worked on coaching, the better I got and the happier I was, and the more results, whether that's financial results or success in the athletes, whatever it might be, the more results I got. And I think that it actually does tie back into Adam's book a little bit, because I think every day you wake up and you're like, man, today I'm going to pursue, Max, you know what you're going to pursue now. You're going to pursue your training, you're going to pursue the design and training think tank. But before, when you may have felt lost with that, you may have been pursuing other things that were just tangential to that and not really going towards the direction that you needed to. What was happening is the elephant was controlling the direction you were going, and the rider had not really gotten on board with what you were supposed to be doing or what you needed to do.
Yeah, the concept of resistance there, I've read this book as well, not Adam's, but I have read that one. That one, I don't know if it necessarily, I guess in some ways it changed my, you sit down and we talk about writer's block, where we used to write weekly blogs. Me and Kyle would go back and forth writing the blog. So every 2 weeks we'd have to write a blog. And it's hard.
Tough 2 years.
Yeah. It's hard to get a topic to write. After you write a lot of them for a while, you're like, what do people want to hear? What do I want to talk about? I feel like I've exhausted all my creativity, and you have all of that. And for me, that was resistance. And I remember reading that book, and I think I was reading at a time when I was writing a lot more. So it was actually more topic specific, because he talks about it through his lens as a writer.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, and now I do it, I just sit down and I start to word vomit. I'll all right, start with an outline, build a skeleton. And when I go back and I look at my rough drafts, they don't even look like coherent things. There's
just words on a page.
It's just words here, words here. Here's what I think a main topic could be. Here's a key point. And then I basically have to go back and reconstruct the whole thing. And I think that same thing happens for work. And then it also happens for me with training, right?
Yeah,
I wake up, my ankle's a little sore, my back's a little sore, I gotta run today, maybe I shouldn't run, what's this doing to my longevity if I do it today? I have all of these wonderful thoughts that make me want to be lazy and not do it. And at some point I realized, if you want to get better at running, say an example, because that was the one that probably has been the most difficult thing for me to improve, is distance running. You can do everything you want for mobility's sake, to improve your balance, to improve your landing position, to improve your technique, but to do all of it, you got to run. So at some
all the Franz
point,
Bosch
it's
preparation drills and all this.
Yeah, or
they can only do so much.
Yeah, somebody's all right, you got to do these pose drills. You land too hard. You got to do this. You got to do that. I'm yeah, but I'm not going to go from 0 to that in one thing. And the repetitions required to get away from 0 towards perfect require me to do a lot of volume of shitty running. Yeah. So I got to do it. I just got to get up.
You got to run long enough to know that the way that you're running is shitty, so that you have the motivation to correct it and the context to be able to correct it in the first place.
Yeah. What you were saying before about just taking that first step, I think is important to breaking through the resistance, right? The idea of I don't know what this is going to turn into. I just have to take that first step of this day to say, all right, word vomit onto the page. I might throw all of this out after the point, but it was a useful exercise for me to at least take the first step for this day. It's the same thing with training. I feel like shit, my ankles hurt, my back hurts. Just go in there and warm up. Get on the bike for 5 minutes, start to picture your session, go through your shoulder warm up, take those first steps and give yourself some momentum to be able to fight against the resistance.
It's almost like fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
It's if you want to be an athlete, you have to start taking steps to be an athlete right now.
Yeah.
Right now. So I think he uses this story of his typewriter in the back. So he was essentially homeless for a period of time. And I think he always knew that he wanted to be a writer, or that he was, in his eyes, meant to be a writer. And he had this old shitty typewriter in the back of his truck. And when he was living in the bed of his truck, it was always back there, but it was piled under all this shit, which is essentially just a metaphor for him avoiding the thing that he knew he should be doing. Yeah. And I think that's the case for most people. How did this influence my coaching? Well, it influenced my coaching because when I listen to my athletes' feedback, a lot of times they are, and I know that I've fallen into this, so it's not like I'm saying that they're terrible and I'm not, but they're just avoiding the things that they need to do because they convince themselves that they dislike it, or they create a narrative for themselves that big people can't do gymnastics, or small people can't be good at ergs and all these things.
My back hurts when I deadlift. I shouldn't be deadlifting.
Oh God, if I had,
there's a million.
I had $1 for every athlete that's come on board who hasn't deadlifted in the last 3 years because they used to every time they deadlift, their back would hurt, and then they would get hurt in the open doing the deadlift workout. I'm like, don't you see what's happening here?
This is a completely tangential thing, but I watched the Michael Jordan documentary.
Those are two very different Michaels too.
Michael Jordan, they came out with the first 2 parts of a 10-part series on his last season with the Bulls. And just watching watching how high he's jumping, he's 6'6". I'm assuming he's well over 200 pounds at that height, even if he's a skinny framed.
215?
215, yeah. So he would be a big, in terms of weight, CrossFit athlete. And his head hit the backboard. So he's landing from like probably 3 feet up on a regular basis playing 100 games a year. And I was thinking, there's people who've been, I remember specifically James talking about CrossFit might be the hardest sport in the world in terms of like the loading, the metabolic stress combined with the neural stress. And I was like, I don't know. Now after watching that, I'm like, I think all sports, every sport at the highest level, if you're playing a season like that, is going to put an immense toll on your body.
CrossFit is hard in a different way
all
than all the other sports.
Yeah, but I mean, golf, it seems really simple, but I'm like, all right, well, you're playing 4 rounds over 4 days. Each one of those rounds, you're walking multiple miles. You're spinning the golf club at 100 miles an hour.
Are you trying to sell me on golf?
No. Well, do it at the level of volume that somebody like Tiger Woods or Rory McIlroy.
And then the level of focus
my
that
elephant
they have
is
to hold on
resisting
to.
that right now. Just to be very clear, to tie all the books together, my elephant is resisting that right now.
You think about the stress that comes from a high-level golfer, right? It's not just the physical toll of walking the miles of the golf course.
Hiding, cheating on your wife.
You got to do all of this stuff. You got to be able to sweep those affairs underneath the rug.
And still put a little ball in a little hole down there.
You ever try to stay hyper-focused for 4 hours at a time with the whole world watching you?
Yeah.
Like, that's just the
would need a lot of coffee.
most pressure ever.
So I was going there because I think a lot of the stories and narratives that people give themselves, specific to CrossFit, because that's most of our audience, are like, oh, this isn't made for me, this is hard, it's unsafe, I can't do that. And a lot of that is just resistance. It's like, if you're doing that and you're feeling that, if you actually want to get better at CrossFit and you want to have a body that's capable of doing it, there is a process to get around that to be able to do those things pain-free. It just might not be what you want.
I have a great example of that. So when I was early on in my CrossFit career, when I was competing, there were 2 movements that I thought of that were just stupid movements. That was how I defined it. It was the GHD.
They suck.
Yeah, exactly. It was the GHD sit-up and the sumo deadlift high pull. And so I literally never, ever did those movements. I just left them completely out of training because when I did GHD sit-ups, it hurt my back. So I'm like, this is a stupid movement.
Brandon chastised me every time I put them in the design. He's like, this is stupid. I'm like, dude, it's tested. I got to do it.
And then I show up in the 2015 regionals with a workout with 100 GHD sit-ups and 50 sumo deadlift high pull, and I'm like, well, I've never done these. And the last time I did them, they hurt my back, and now I have to do 100. I was definitely the last one off the GHD.
So moral of the story
You are your own worst enemy.
That's very true. The other thing that I took out of that book is just the idea that, as far as you can progress in this level of becoming a professional, resistance is always present. It's never going to go away completely. So I think those thoughts of like, hey, if you care about your work, if you're passionate about it, you're not going to work. It might be a little bit misleading, and people might be setting themselves up with misguided expectations of like, hey, why is this still hard for me? I care about this. I like this. Like, this is something that should be easy. It should come easily for me. Whereas the idea of like, you still got to break through that resistance every day. Like sitting down, writing that first cell of training when you've got 5 training designs to write for the day. That first one's the hardest.
Or if it's your last one.
Or if it's your last one.
You know what I mean? You're sitting down to write your very last one. You're on the last day, and it takes you 45 minutes to write 1 day of training. That would have taken you 5 minutes if you had sat down with a fresh head.
Yeah.
And you know that too. You're like sitting there and you put something down. You're like, no, that's not right. Delete. No, that's not right. And then in the back of your head, there's another voice that says, the programming doesn't even matter. Like, the athlete is the thing that matters. No!
It's 2 different voices of resistance, I guess. But
I have 2 riders, is what I'm telling you.
Oh, there you go. Nice.
I have 2 elephants.
One's on top of the other.
I'm running around with marks on my shoulders right
Max
now.
has circus elephants.
All right, we can wrap it up there.
All right, so the 3 books. The War of Art by Steven Pressfield, Busting Loose from the Money Game by Robert
Show them
Scheinfeld.
the front of the book so they can see it, Max.
Sorry, man.
Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt.